yesterday's game happened, and I think everybody knows that whatever they drew up at the end of the game did not happen. Did not happen. Sophie Cunningham made an incredible read. The play wasn't great. And in the end, it is hilarious. Aaliyah Boston did a Thomas Bryant. If you guys don't remember, when LeBron James hit the shot to make him the all-time leading scorer.
Caitlin Clark just put the entire league on notice. We're talking about a buzzer beater that didn't just close out a game. It announced that this version of the Indiana Fever is something different. The second that ball left her hands, you already knew it was good. There's a level of confidence Caitlin carries every time she steps on that floor, and it's not the kind you develop over time, it's the kind you showed up with. From the moment she arrived in Indiana, people questioned whether her college dominance would hold up, whether the pace of the pro game would expose her, whether the physicality of WNBA defenders would change her. Night after night, game winner after game winner, she answers every single one of those questions without opening her mouth. This isn't a rookie still figuring things out. This is a player who walked into the league and immediately started rewriting what the WNBA looks like to the rest of the world. Arenas are selling out. Ratings are at record highs. The conversation around women's basketball has never taken up this much space in the culture. And standing right at the center of all of that is number 22, pulling up from distances that most professionals wouldn't even practice from. None of what she does out there is accidental. That's preparation colliding with pressure, and Caitlin Clark doesn't shrink in pressure. She gravitates toward it. The bigger the moment, the sharper she gets. That's what separates truly generational players from everyone else, and Indiana is watching one do it in real time. But here's where it gets really interesting, because what followed that final buzzer wasn't your typical post-game celebration. There's a clear difference between a team celebrating a basketball win and a team actively putting something on display. What went down after that shot hit completely different. Players weren't just going through the normal winning motions, there was a purpose to it. The energy in that moment extended well past the relief of getting a W in the standings. When you actually pay attention to the body language, to who was gravitating toward who, to the intensity behind those reactions, this wasn't just a group of women celebrating a hard-fought victory. This was a group of women communicating something to anyone paying close enough attention. In the WNBA, so much of the real messaging happens away from the actual game. It happens on social media, in sideline interactions, in the way players choose to publicly show up for each other when the cameras are still rolling. Moments like this carry weight that goes far beyond the final score. And if you've been following this Indiana Fever situation closely, you already know exactly what that weight is connected to. And that brings us to the question that the entire basketball community is now sitting with. Did we just watch the Indiana Fever locker room draw a line in the sand against their own coaching staff? Because that's what people are saying. That's the conversation flooding every comment section, every sports forum, every group chat full of WNBA fans right now. This isn't just drama for the sake of drama. When players on a professional roster start visibly rallying around each other in ways that seem pointed and intentional, that usually means something is brewing beneath the surface that the front office and coaching staff can't ignore. The relationship between a locker room and its coaches is one of the most fragile dynamics in all of professional sports, and when Caitlin Clark is involved, when she's the gravitational center of everything happening with this franchise, every single move gets amplified tenfold. What might be a minor internal tension on any other team becomes a national storyline when your most important player is the most talked about athlete in women's sports. That's the reality Indiana is navigating right now, and it is anything but simple.
A lot of people are taking the fact that they went rogue as almost like dissent against the coaches, dissent against the organization, that the players are turning on the coaches, the players aren't playing for Steph anymore, and this could be not further from the truth, or there could be truth into it. And I'll explain the two different situations, because there is nuance to this. There is absolutely some nuance to this entire conversation.
Let's get into exactly why this particular moment matters as much as it does. At the end of regulation against the Dallas Wings, the Indiana Fever had a play drawn up. The coaching staff had a specific design, a specific intention, and a specific player they wanted the ball going to in that moment. That's how professional basketball works. You get a timeout, you diagram something out, and every person on that floor is supposed to execute their assignment. That's the structure. That's the expectation. Except that's not what happened. Sophie Cunningham looked at the situation unfolding in front of her and made a split-second decision to completely abandon the designed play and go with what she was reading on the floor. And that improvised, off-script, against-the-game plan decision is the one that ended up working. The shot went up, the moment landed, and suddenly, Sophie Cunningham wasn't a player who went rogue. She was a hero. The kind of hero that gets mobbed by her teammates. The kind of hero that gets her moment plastered all over social media within minutes. What's significant here isn't just that it worked. It's that nobody on that roster even flinched at the fact that the design play got thrown out the window. Nobody looked toward the bench with hesitation. Nobody seemed concerned about what the coaching staff's reaction was going to be. The celebration was immediate, genuine, and completely unfiltered. And Caitlin Clark was right in the middle of all of it, matching that energy like she'd been waiting for exactly this kind of moment to unfold. That's not nothing. When the face of your franchise is that visibly locked in with a teammate who just went against the coach's call, that speaks to something deeper about the culture that's developing inside that locker room. Because here's what people keep glossing over when they talk about Caitlin Clark's impact on this team. It isn't just about her stat line. It's about the gravity she creates around everyone else. When a player of her caliber fully embraces a moment like what Sophie Cunningham just gave them, it sends a message to every other player on that roster. It says, your instincts are trusted here. It says this team runs on feel just as much as it runs on scheme. And when that message is being co-signed by the player who is quite literally putting this franchise on the map right now, it carries enormous weight in that locker room. The social media piece is also not something to wave off as just players being players online. In today's WNBA, social media is part of the game. It's where narratives get built, where fan bases rally, and where players communicate things that might be too pointed to say directly in a post-game press conference. When the entire roster turns Sophie's moment into a coordinated celebration online, that's intentional. That's a statement dressed up as enthusiasm. And the fact that it's all swirling around a team where Caitlin Clark is the undeniable center of attention means every layer of it gets examined under a microscope. Now here's where it gets complicated, because not everything is as straightforward as it looks on the surface. And anyone telling you this is a simple situation either hasn't thought it through or isn't being honest with you. There are genuinely two separate ways to look at what happened here, and both of them carry real merit depending on where you're standing.
I'm putting it out there right now. Not one player dislikes Stephanie White personally that is currently on this team. I can be almost certain of that. I can say that with 99% certainty. But again, I don't know if they dislike Chrissy Zides personally. She was the bad coach. And again, anyone who's been on a team knows sometimes you can like your coach and you can just... Sometimes you can like your coach as a person and you can just never want to play for them again. I've had plenty of coaches like that through my life where I'm like, I genuinely, like, I have nothing as a person, I just can't play for them anymore.
Before we go any further down this road, we need to pump the brakes and lay out some ground truth. Because without the proper foundation, this whole conversation becomes just another hot take that doesn't actually serve anybody. So let's establish what we actually know versus what people are spinning. First and most importantly, Stephanie White is not someone that the players on this roster have a personal problem with. That's not really up for debate. From everything that's come out publicly and from every read you can get on the internal dynamics of this team, the issue, if there even is one, is not about Stephanie White, the human being. It's not about her character. It's not about whether she treats people with respect in the building. By virtually all accounts, she does. And that distinction matters enormously, because the internet has a way of flattening these situations into villain narratives, and that's not what this is. Nobody is out here saying Stephanie White is a bad person. Nobody on that roster is walking into practice with animosity toward their head coach on a personal level. That's almost certainly not what's happening, and it would be irresponsible to frame it that way. What is more complicated And what anyone who has actually played competitive sports at any meaningful level already understands from lived experience is that you can deeply respect someone as a human being while simultaneously having real frustrations with them as a coach. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. They exist together all the time. In professional sports locker rooms, and pretending otherwise is just naive. A player can genuinely like their coach, enjoy their presence in the building, appreciate the way they communicate on a personal level, and still feel like the system isn't working, still feel like the rotations aren't right, still feel like the play calling in critical moments isn't putting the team in the best position to win. That tension is one of the oldest stories in sports, and it plays out on every level, from high school gyms to NBA arenas to WNBA courts. And when you're talking about a locker room that includes Caitlin Clark, a player who came into this league with an almost supernatural understanding of the game, a player who has seen what winning basketball looks like and knows what it feels like to operate within a system built specifically around her strengths, that tension has the potential to be amplified in ways that most coaching situations never have to deal with. Caitlin Clark is not just another talented player pushing back against a coach's system. She is the reason this franchise is relevant in a way it has never been before. She is the reason people are tuning in. She is the reason tickets are selling and cameras are showing up, and the national conversation keeps circling back to Indianapolis. That reality changes the power dynamic in ways that are genuinely unprecedented for a team like Indiana. And Stephanie White is navigating that whether she signed up for it or not. So when we're talking about friction, real or perceived, between this locker room and the coaching staff, we have to hold all of that context at the same time. It's not personal, but it is real. And the difference between those two things is exactly where this story lives.
We don't know what exactly type of coach Stephanie White is because we're not behind closed doors. If Stephanie White is a coach that encourages players to, or that is going to encourage players to make reads, even if it's against a set play, which I don't believe she is, but again, I don't know this because I'm only judging based on what we've seen publicly, then this isn't going to cause anything. If it turns out that Stephanie White's one of those coaches, that's like, it's my way or no way. And people are saying, oh, Austin Kelly drew it up. Yes, but like, who hired Austin Kelly and gave him that like role? That's Stephanie White okaying it all. If it's a coach's way or no way, and there's tons of coaches like that, by the way. There's tons of good coaches that are like that.
Here's where the conversation shifts into territory that a lot of people aren't equipped to have, because this isn't just about one broken play or one viral celebration. This goes straight to the heart of coaching philosophy. And there are genuinely two schools of thought in basketball that have both produced championships and both produced disasters depending on execution. There is a very real and very legitimate style of coaching that operates on total system commitment. No freelancing, no improvisation, no individual reads that deviate from the called play, regardless of what the defense is giving you. The coach sees the game from a higher vantage point, designs the system with all 5 players in mind, and demands that every single person on the floor trusts that structure completely, even when their instincts are screaming something different at them in the moment. And the reason that philosophy exists isn't because those coaches are control freaks or because they don't trust their players' basketball IQ. The reason it exists is actually deeply logical when you break it down. There's a story that circulates in basketball circles about a coach at a preseason camp who pulled a player aside after he made a decision mid-play that was technically the right basketball read. The defense gave him something and he took it, but it wasn't what was called. And the coach sat him down and walked him through exactly why that was still a problem. He told that player that he understood the decision made sense in isolation. He told him the read was good. But then he explained that the moment one player starts operating on their own instincts instead of the called play, the other 4 people on the floor are running something completely different. They're executing the actual design. They're setting screens for a play that's no longer happening. They're cutting to spaces that are now occupied. The whole system breaks down, Not because one person made a bad decision, but because one person made a different decision. And that's the distinction that separates system basketball from instinct basketball at the highest level. That philosophy has a championship pedigree you cannot argue with. Greg Popovich built one of the most decorated dynasties in NBA history on exactly that foundation. The San Antonio system was so deeply ingrained that players who came from completely different backgrounds and completely different styles of play transformed themselves to fit it, and they won because of it. Phil Jackson's triangle offense operated on the same principle. The triangle only works when all 5 players are reading the same cues, making the same movements, and trusting them. Geometry of the system over their own individual instincts. It's not a coincidence that both of those coaches are considered among the greatest to ever do it. The system works, but only under one very specific condition. Players have to genuinely believe at a core level that what the coach is drawing up is more valuable than what their own eyes are telling them in the moment. That belief has to be total. It cannot be halfway. The second a player starts privately questioning whether the system is actually better than their read, the whole thing starts to crack. And the longer that crack goes unaddressed, the wider it gets. That's exactly what makes what we just watched in Indiana so telling. Because when Sophie Cunningham abandoned the designed play and the entire roster responded the way they did, with that immediate, enthusiastic, publicly displayed celebration, what they were really showing the world is that the belief in the system isn't there right now. Not fully. Maybe not even close to fully. And with Caitlin Clark leading that charge in energy and visibility, the message landed louder than anyone in that coaching staff probably wanted it to. She is too prominent, too watched, and too central to this franchise's identity for her reaction in that moment to go unanalyzed. When the most important player on your roster is that visibly energized by a teammate going off script, it raises a question that Stephanie White and her entire staff are going to have to answer, not for the media, but for themselves.
He was like, look, I know, I was trying to explain, I was like, look, what you did was right, but that's not the point. He's like, it's literally, if people just start going rogue and making reads, the offense that he wanted to run didn't work. And it was like, it's as long as everybody is making reads, he's like, if you do this, then 4 other people have to be on the same page, and that's not the case. There are coaches that have different philosophies. There are really good coaches that are different philosophies. Again, I play with some unbelievable coaches that have the philosophy of it's my way or no way.
Now put yourself in Stephanie White's shoes for a second, because her situation is genuinely one of the more complicated positions any coach in the WNBA has been in recently, and it doesn't get nearly enough nuanced discussion. She didn't walk into Indiana with some cold, authoritarian reputation. That's not who she is, and that's not how she was received when she took this job. Stephanie White built her name in this league as someone players want to play for, someone who invests in relationships, someone who makes players feel seen as human beings first and athletes second. That relational quality is real. It's documented, and it's genuinely why people around the league have respected her as a coach. She has a warmth to her coaching identity that a lot of people in her position simply don't have. And that's not a small thing when you're trying to build trust inside a professional locker room. But here's where the complexity lives. Because Stephanie White also came into Indiana with a vision, a structured offensive vision. A system that has specific rules, specific spacing principles, specific reads that she wants executed the way she diagrams them. And on paper, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Having a defined offensive identity is what separates organized professional basketball from 5 people just improvising on a court together. The problem isn't that she has a system. The problem is what happens when that system meets real game results and the numbers don't cooperate. Because you can sell a roster on a philosophy when things are clicking. You can ask players to trust the process when the process is visibly working. But when the results start coming back underwhelming, and the statistics start telling a story that contradicts the vision, that's when even the most loyal players start having quiet conversations they wouldn't have otherwise. And the results right now are genuinely hard to defend. The Indiana Fever are sitting 9th in offensive rating across the league. 9th. Let that marinate for a second, because that number doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in the context of who is actually on this roster. You have Caitlin Clark running the point. Caitlin Clark, the player who single-handedly shifted the cultural footprint of women's basketball, who averaged numbers in college that nobody had ever seen before, who came into the WNBA and immediately proved that her game translated. You have Aaliyah Boston operating in the paint, one of the most fundamentally sound and versatile big players in the league. You have Kelsey Mitchell giving you secondary scoring punch that most teams in this league would build their offense around if she was their best option. That is not a 9th place offensive talent level. That is nowhere close to a 9th place offensive talent level. That's a top 3, top 4 conversation waiting to happen if everything is functioning the way it should be. When that kind of gap opens up between the talent on paper and the production on the floor, there is only one place the questions eventually land, and that's on the system and the people designing it. Players at this level are sophisticated. Caitlin Clark is one of the most basketball-intelligent players the sport has ever produced. She sees the floor at a level that very few people in the history of the game have been able to match. When someone with that kind of vision is operating inside a structure that's producing 9th place offensive efficiency, you better believe she feels it every single possession. She knows when a play design is putting her in a worse position than where her instincts would take her. She knows when the spacing is off. She knows when the reads being called from the sideline aren't matching what the defense is actually giving. And the more that disconnect persists, the harder it becomes for any player, let alone the most watched player in women's sports, to fully commit to the called play over what her own eyes are telling her. That erosion of trust in the system isn't a character flaw. It's a natural human response to evidence. And right now, the evidence is sitting at 9th place.
Caitlin Clark, I'd say, is not expecting to be subbed out of this possession. At this stage, Caitlin Clark is locking in, thinking, fuck this, I gotta get a stop. Like, she didn't miss a high 5. Like, I don't think there's anything in this. People are looking too far into this. But from a team perspective, in one of the high points of the season, if all of a sudden it turns out that the Indiana Fever or the coaches and the coaching staff are upset that they made a game-winning play, that's when you can lose a locker room.
Here's the part of this story that should have Indiana's front office genuinely losing sleep, and it connects directly back to Caitlin Clark, because everything with this franchise connects back to Caitlin Clark at this point. That's just the reality of what she's built here. But buried underneath all the highlight plays and the record-breaking moments and the sold-out arenas is a detail that reveals something deeply uncomfortable about how this team is being managed. Justin Pard has not played a single minute this season. Not one. 0. And before you shrug that off as a roster decision that doesn't involve Caitlin Clark, think about what it means for the environment she has to compete in every single day. Caitlin Clark did not come to Indiana to be part of a poorly managed situation. She came here to win. She came here to build something. She came here because this was the opportunity in front of her, and from day one, she poured everything she had into making this franchise matter on a national level. And she succeeded at that in ways that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Arenas that used to be half full are now packed. Broadcasts that used to be afterthoughts are now appointment television. The Indiana Fever went from a franchise people acknowledged existed to a franchise people genuinely follow, debate, and invest in emotionally. Caitlin Clark did that. She carried that on her back and she made it look natural. So when the organizations surrounding her start showing signs of dysfunction, real, documented, statistically supported dysfunction, it reflects on her in a way that isn't fair, but is absolutely unavoidable. She is the face. When the face is attached to a body that isn't functioning right, people notice. And Caitlin Clark notices most of all. Development contracts in the WNBA are not guaranteed playing time situations. Everybody understands that. When you sign a player to that kind of deal, the expectation on both sides is that minutes are earned, not handed over. But here's what makes this particular situation impossible to explain away with standard roster logic. Every single other player currently on a development contract in this league has gotten on the floor at some point this season. Every one of them. Even in the lowest leverage situations, even in blowouts where the game was decided before halftime, those players have seen real minutes. Because that's what the contract is literally designed to produce. You bring someone in on a development deal because you want to evaluate them under live game conditions. You want to see how they handle real pressure. You want to give them something to grow with. That's not a favor. That's the entire point of the structure. So when one specific player under that contract type hasn't gotten a single second of floor time, while every comparable player around the league has gotten something, that stops being a basketball decision and starts being something else entirely. And Caitlin Clark, who sees everything that happens inside that organization with a level of awareness that most people underestimate, is not blind to that. This is a woman who tracked every single statistical inefficiency in the Fever's offensive system and felt every one of them in her body on the court. You think she doesn't notice when a teammate who deserves an opportunity isn't getting one in a way that defies every established pattern? Caitlin Clark is one of the most detail-oriented, competitive minds in the sport right now. The small things don't escape her attention. They fuel her. They inform how she understands her environment. And when the environment starts showing cracks, real cracks, not manufactured drama, she feels those cracks differently than anyone else on the roster because she has more invested in this franchise turning into something special than anyone else wearing that uniform. That's what makes the Justin Pard situation matter beyond just the roster management conversation. It's a signal. It's the kind of signal that a player like Caitlin Clark picks up on and files away somewhere in her competitive brain. Players talk within that locker room. They see who's getting opportunities and who isn't. They form quiet opinions about how decisions are being made and whether those decisions are actually in service of the team winning or whether something else is driving them. And in a locker room where Caitlin Clark has become the undeniable heartbeat, where her energy sets the temperature for everything else, those quiet opinions don't stay quiet indefinitely. She doesn't have to say a word publicly for her perspective to be felt by every person in that building. Her presence alone amplifies everything. The front office built this entire franchise identity around what Caitlin Clark represents. And right now, the operational decisions being made around her are not matching the magnitude of what she's given this organization. That disconnect is not sustainable. And somebody in Indianapolis needs to recognize that before it becomes a much bigger story than it already is.
A player or coach or whatever, I want to see, hear, and feel that culture. And so I think about sometimes culture is kind of like you have to plant it, you have to grow it, and you have to maintain it. And it's a little bit like a garden, you know. Sometimes you have to weed it. You know, you may have some problems with some weeds taking over your culture, and you have to plop them out.
There's something circulating right now that deserves way more attention than it's getting. Lynn Dunn, senior advisor for the Indiana Fever, a woman whose fingerprints are all over the foundation of women's basketball as we know it, sat down in front of a panel audience and started dropping what sounded like leadership wisdom. But make no mistake about what this was really about. This was about Caitlin Clark. Everything happening in Indiana right now circles back to Caitlin Clark, and the sooner people accept that, the clearer this whole situation becomes. Lynn Dunn sitting up there talking about culture, about what makes a team function, about how organizations have to protect themselves from the inside out. And then she lands on this whole thing about removing pieces that don't fit, about how sometimes the most important decision a caretaker can make is knowing when something needs to go before the damage spreads past the point of fixing. She never said Caitlin Clark's name. She didn't have to. Now, if someone played that clip for you with zero context, you might nod along and keep scrolling. Coaches say stuff like that all the time. Veteran front office minds love a good metaphor, love wrapping sharp opinions inside language that sounds philosophical enough to avoid direct accountability. That's a whole art form in professional sports. But here's the thing, context doesn't just matter here. Context is literally the entire story, because Caitlin Clark isn't some rotational piece they're quietly phasing out. Caitlin Clark is the reason the Indiana Fever are relevant in conversations happening way outside the usual WNBA bubble. She is the product, she is the draw, she is the reason cameras show up, the reason opposing arenas sell out when Indiana comes to town, the reason this franchise went from an afterthought to a talking point overnight. So when Lynn Dunn starts philosophizing about removal on a public panel, the only person that framing could possibly apply to at this scale is Caitlin Clark. What's been building in Indiana isn't organic drama. It's not locker room gossip that accidentally found its way out into the open. This is architecture. This is a structured, deliberate narrative being assembled piece by piece in real time, out in the open. Then Caitlin Clark is the one it's being built around. Somebody drew up a plan, and right now you're watching it get constructed brick by brick, using language that gives everyone involved just enough plausible deniability to act caught off guard when the move finally lands. The metaphors are intentional. The timing of Lynn Dunn appearing on panels to talk about this right now is intentional. Every word is a breadcrumb pointing straight at Caitlin Clark, laid out carefully enough that when the actual announcement drops, the audience has already been conditioned to receive it. And that's what makes this so uncomfortable to sit with, because Caitlin Clark hasn't done anything to deserve being the subject of a quiet smear campaign dressed up in coaching philosophy. What Caitlin Clark has done is show up and completely transform the financial and cultural reality of a league that spent decades fighting for the bare minimum of mainstream attention. A regular season game, not a playoff game, not a rivalry matchup with stakes attached, a completely ordinary game on a Wednesday night schedule. Pulled over 3 million viewers because Caitlin Clark was the one lacing up. 3 million people for a regular season WNBA game. The kind of number that makes network executives rethink entire broadcast strategies. The kind of number that changes what a franchise is actually worth in a negotiating room. Caitlin Clark did that. Not a marketing campaign, not a rebrand, not some executive's master plan. Caitlin Clark walked into this league and single-handedly shifted what was possible here. Ticket demand around her games, merchandise attached to her name, the way completely casual sports fans who never gave women's basketball a second look suddenly started setting reminders. All of that traces directly back to Caitlin Clark, and the ripple she created isn't done moving. It's still expanding, which means whatever Indiana is building toward right now, whatever this slow and calculated campaign eventually turns into, the fallout won't just land on one franchise. If they move Caitlin Clark, if they actually pull that trigger, the entire league feels it. Every front office, every broadcast deal, every conversation about where the WNBA goes from here, all of it gets complicated the moment Caitlin Clark isn't where the audience expects her to be.
Cut a player because they don't fit into your culture that you've created, and it all goes back to behavior.
It all goes back to behavior. The toughest thing is when you got to trade a player, cut a player, and it all goes back to behavior. What did Dan Dockett say about Caitlin Clark? Oh, she's a DICK. Stop being a DICK. That is what he had to say. He was talking about beyond.
Pay close attention to the specific language Lynn Dunn chose to use up on that panel, because word choice at this level is never accidental. She didn't talk about performance. She didn't talk about production. She didn't stand up there and make a case about statistics being the problem. She made it about behavior, about culture fit, about the idea that a player can be doing everything right on the court and still be the wrong person for the room. And that framing is doing a lot of heavy lifting right now because it conveniently sidesteps everything Caitlin Clark actually accomplished last season. The 19 points per game, the 8 assists per game as a rookie in a league full of veterans who've been running these systems for years. None of that gets addressed. None of that gets challenged because it can't be. The numbers are untouchable. So instead, the conversation gets steered somewhere the numbers can't follow. It gets steered toward behavior, toward culture, toward the kinds of accusations that are specifically designed to be impossible to disprove. And then, 3 days before Lynn Dunn even sat down on that panel, Dan Dakich went on a podcast and started going in on Caitlin Clark. Not her shooting percentage, not her defensive positioning, her personality. He called her difficult, said she's a problem in that locker room, went after the way she interacts with referees, the way she carries herself, questioned her shot selection as if that was somehow a character flaw rather than a basketball decision that every elite scorer in the history of the sport has had argued about them at some point. He even reached for a word, starting with the letter D, and it wasn't difficult. That was specifically chosen to undercut her in a way that had nothing to do with basketball. Nothing. That was personal. That was deliberate, and that was the first brick in the wall. Now think about the timing of that. Really sit with it. Dan Dakich goes on a podcast and takes shots at Caitlin Clark's character. 3 days later, Lynn Dunn, the senior advisor of the franchise Caitlin Clark plays for, is on a public panel talking about how sometimes you have to let a player go because they don't fit the culture, and it comes down to behavior, not ability, behavior. You want to tell me those two things happening in the same week, aimed at the same person, using the exact same framing, is a coincidence? That's not a coincidence. That's a rollout. That's two parts of the same message being delivered through two different messengers so that neither one of them has to carry the full weight of what's actually being said. This is what a coordinated narrative looks like when it's still in the early stages. They're not ready to make the move yet, so instead they're running the pre-campaign, softening the audience, getting people used to the idea that maybe, just maybe, Caitlin Clark is the problem. That maybe the issue in Indiana isn't the front office decisions, or the roster construction, or the coaching situation. Maybe the issue is the biggest star they've ever had, and the way she conducts herself. And if enough voices start echoing that same theme, it starts to feel like consensus. It starts to feel like something everyone already knew, but nobody was saying out loud. That's how you prepare a fan base for a move that would otherwise feel incomprehensible. But here's the part that truly exposes what this is actually about. All of this started, the podcasts, the panel appearances, the loaded metaphors, all of it, the moment Caitlin Clark stopped staying silent and started standing up for herself. The moment she stopped absorbing everything being thrown at her with a smile and pushed back. And apparently, somewhere in that Indiana front office, that wasn't the response they were expecting from her. Because the second she showed she wasn't going to be managed quietly, the entire machinery kicked into gear.
Yeah, I hear the Fever are sick of Caitlin Clark. Y'all hearing that too? It's not coming out of nowhere. So think about this. Lynn Dunn joins this panel, right? That nobody even knows where this channel is for real. She joins this panel and is talking about getting rid of a player amid in behavioral issues and things like that. The Indiana Fever aren't built for Caitlin.
And then it got louder, because it wasn't just Lynn Dunn on a panel and Dan Dakich on a podcast anymore. The circle started expanding, and that expansion is exactly what tells you this thing has real organizational backing behind it. Michael Thompson, NBA champion, father of Klay Thompson, a man whose entire professional footprint lives inside the men's game, jumped on his radio show and started talking about Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. Not because someone asked him to break down her pick and roll execution. Not because someone pitched him a segment about rookie development in the WNBA. He came with it unprompted, and he came with specifics. Said he's hearing from multiple people inside that organization that the Fever are done, not frustrated, not in a rough patch, done. That the relationship between Caitlin Clark and that front office has deteriorated past the point where anyone inside believes it can be repaired. That Stephanie White's system and the way Caitlin Clark plays basketball are fundamentally incompatible, and that Indiana has already started thinking about what life looks like on the other side of that. Now let's slow down on who Michael Thompson is in this context, because that part matters just as much as what he actually said. This is not a WNBA insider. This is not a beat reporter who has been covering the Fever for 3 seasons, building sources, attending practices, tracking the temperature of the locker room over time. Michael Thompson does not live in that world. He dips into women's basketball occasionally, the way a lot of NBA adjacent voices do, when something is big enough to cross over into their lane. So for him to come out with this level of detail, with multiple sources cited, with specific language about the relationship being broken and the system system not fitting, that didn't happen because he went digging. That happened because someone handed it to him. Someone with a direct line to what's happening inside that Indiana organization picked up the phone, or had a conversation at the right event, or made sure the right information found its way to someone with a platform big enough to amplify it. This is a leak that was designed to look like reporting, and that's what separates this from normal sports drama. When a situation is genuinely messy but unintentional, information comes out in fragments. It's contradictory. Different people tell different versions. The timeline is scattered. This doesn't look like that at all. This looks like a coordinated information release. Dan Dakich goes first with the character framing, the behavior, the attitude, the way she carries herself in spaces the public can't see. Then Lynn Dunn follows with the philosophical justification. Sometimes culture fit is more important than what someone does on the court. And then Michael Thompson comes in carrying the sourced confirmation. Multiple people inside the building. The relationship is broken. They want out. That is a three-part message. Introduction, context, confirmation, delivered across different platforms, through different voices, spaced out just enough to feel organic while actually functioning like a press release. And here's the part that should genuinely disturb anyone paying attention. This entire infrastructure is being built specifically to make trading Caitlin Clark feel survivable to the public, because the people running this know exactly what they're sitting on. They know that Caitlin Clark isn't just a good basketball player who draws a solid crowd. She is the single most transformative figure this league has seen in a generation. They know what the numbers look like. They know what the arenas look like when she walks into them. They know what their own franchise looked like before she got there versus what it looks like now. So they also know that if they move her without any groundwork laid, the backlash doesn't just come from fans online. It comes from sponsors, it comes from broadcast partners, it comes from the league office, it comes from every corner of the sports world that has been pointing at Caitlin Clark as proof that the WNBA's moment has finally arrived. The only way to survive that reaction is to get ahead of it, to spend weeks building a story where Indiana tried everything, gave it every chance, but ultimately the culture just wasn't salvageable, to make it sound like they had no other option. That's what all of this is. It's not tea, it's not drama, it's damage control being written in advance, and Caitlin Clark is the one being set up to take the blame for a decision that was made in a conference room without her.
I don't think this is a coincidence that you got Michael Thompson saying what he's saying, you got Lynn Dunn saying what she's saying, you got Corey Close, who might be done and tired of the college recruiting in NIL. She might be looking for a WNBA job, and it might come with the LA Sparks when Caitlin Clark arrives.
Now there's another name that needs to be added to this picture, because this thing keeps growing the more you look at it. Corey Close, head coach at UCLA, national championship on her resume, and someone who has worked directly with Caitlin Clark during USA basketball summers, recently sat down on a panel and started dissecting Caitlin Clark's game in a very particular way. She got into the defensive side of Clark's play. She talked about how Clark's confidence, which everyone acknowledges is one of the core reasons she's as good as she is, can occasionally tip over into a liability when she leans on it in situations that don't call for it. And she packaged all of this in the kind of measured, analytical tone that makes it easy to receive as objective basketball evaluation from someone with real credentials. On paper, that's exactly what it looks like. A respected coach who has been in elite spaces for a long time, offering a nuanced take on a player she's had direct experience with. Nothing inflammatory, nothing you could easily push back against. But pull the camera back a little bit and everything about that panel appearance starts to look different, because Corey Close isn't operating in a vacuum right now. College basketball in the NIL era has fundamentally restructured itself around money and movement in ways that have made life genuinely difficult for coaches who came up learning a completely different version of the game. The recruiting landscape has shifted so dramatically that coaches who built their entire identity around development, around long-term relationships, around the traditional model of building a program from the ground up, a lot of them are quietly looking around and wondering whether the college game still fits them the way it used to. And the word that's been floating around people close to Corey Close is that she might be one of those coaches, that the WNBA, with its different structure and its professional environment, might be exactly the kind of space she's been eyeing, which means that panel appearance, that careful and credentialed breakdown of Caitlin Clark's tendencies and limitations wasn't just analysis, it was positioning. And here's where Caitlin Clark becomes the center of this specific chess move too, because if Indiana actually follows through on what every piece of this campaign has been pointing toward, the conversation about where Caitlin Clark lands next isn't complicated. The Los Angeles Sparks make too much sense to ignore. The cap flexibility is there, the draft assets are there. The desperation for relevance in the second largest media market in the country is absolutely there. The Sparks have been invisible in the broader sports conversation for years now, and every executive in that building knows it. Caitlin Clark arriving in Los Angeles doesn't just fix that, it fixes it immediately, completely, and with the kind of national attention that no rebuild strategy or draft lottery hope could ever manufacture. She would make the Sparks matter overnight in a city full of professional sports franchises competing for the same shrinking pool of casual fan attention. So now look at what Corey Close did through that lens. She went on a panel and demonstrated publicly and on record that she understands Caitlin Clark's game deeply enough to identify its edges, that she's not intimidated by the magnitude of who Caitlin Clark is right now, that she has the professional history with her to build something real, and the coaching intelligence to address the areas where Caitlin Clark hasn't yet reached her ceiling. That is not a basketball breakdown, that is a resume submission. That is a coach telling every front office with ears, and specifically the one in Los Angeles, that she is the person who can step in, manage the personality, develop the weaknesses, and unlock whatever version of Caitlin Clark the world hasn't fully seen yet. It's calculated, it's professionally savvy, and in the context of everything else swirling around Caitlin Clark right now, it fits into this broader pattern with uncomfortable precision, because that's what's so striking about all of this when you lay it out flat. Every single person who has publicly weighed in on Caitlin Clark over the past few weeks has had some kind of angle running underneath the surface. Not one of these voices is purely disinterested. Dan Dakich needed the attention. Lynn Dunn is protecting the organizational narrative. Michael Thompson was handed information someone wanted distributed. And Corey Close is lobbying for a job that doesn't exist yet but might very soon, and with Caitlin Clark as the centerpiece of the opportunity. And none of them are saying Caitlin Clark's name with anything resembling honesty about what their real motivation is. They're all using her, all building something off of her name and her profile, while simultaneously framing her as the problem. That's the part that needs to be said out loud. Caitlin Clark is being used as a tool by every single person in this conversation, while being publicly positioned as the liability. If that doesn't tell you everything about how this league and the people orbiting it actually operate, nothing will.
Man, Lynn Dunn can't stop. Lynn Dunn is out in the public planting the seeds that she's trading Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark 100% will get traded away from the Indiana Fever before Stephanie White gets moved. That is what Lynn Dunn is going out and doing. Lynn Dunn did an interview where she joined a panel, and my, oh my, this is big news.
Here's what nobody in that Indiana front office has actually thought all the way through. Caitlin Clark is not a commodity that gets quietly reassigned and then fades into whatever new market absorbs her. She doesn't work that way. The audience she built doesn't work that way. The people who started watching women's basketball for the first time in their lives because of her aren't attached to a franchise or a jersey color. They're attached to her specifically. They follow Caitlin Clark the way people followed players before the era of corporate brand loyalty took over sports entirely. That kind of connection is personal, it's direct, and it travels. So every calculation Indiana thinks they're making right now has a variable in it that their spreadsheets aren't accounting for. What happens to Fever ticket sales the morning after a trade gets announced? What happens to their local broadcast numbers, their merchandise revenue, the energy in that building on a Tuesday night when the team they spent 3 weeks constructing a narrative around is suddenly running a different point guard out there? Those aren't hypothetical questions with comfortable answers. Those are the actual consequences sitting on the other side of this decision, and the people engineering this campaign have been so focused on making the move feel justifiable that they haven't spent nearly enough time thinking about what Indiana looks like on the other side of it. And Caitlin Clark hasn't said a word publicly about any of this. Not one word. She hasn't addressed the podcast comments. She hasn't responded to the panel appearances. She hasn't put anything on social media that acknowledges this entire structure being built around her name. And that silence is being misread by the people running this campaign as passivity, as someone who can be managed, as a situation that can be controlled. But anyone who has watched Caitlin Clark for more than 20 minutes on the court, in interviews, in the competitive environments she's been thriving in since she was a teenager, knows that her silence is never really silence. It's patience. It's someone who understands that the most powerful response to a coordinated attack is to let the people running it fully expose themselves before you say anything at all. Because the thing about campaigns like this one is that they only work if the target cooperates with the framing. If Caitlin Clark reacts emotionally, they point to the reaction as proof of the behavior problem they invented. If she responds publicly, they use her words to fuel the next phase of the rollout. The only move that actually disrupts it is the one she appears to be making, which is to exist, to perform, to continue being the person those 3 million viewers showed up to watch, and to let everyone who built this thing carry the weight of what they built when it eventually collapses under its own contradictions. And it will collapse. Because the foundation of this entire narrative is the idea that Caitlin Clark is somehow a problem that needs to be solved, and that premise falls apart the moment you measure it against anything real, against the attendance numbers, against the broadcast ratings, against the sponsorship conversations that are happening at a completely different level than they were 2 years ago, against the simple observable fact that every arena she walks into, home or away, treats it like an event. You cannot build a sustainable case that someone is a cultural cancer when the culture around them is visibly, measurably, undeniably thriving because of their presence. The numbers don't lie in the direction this campaign needs them to lie, and eventually the people with real financial stakes in what the WNBA becomes over the next decade are gonna make that very clear to whoever in Indiana thinks this ends well for them. The story isn't over. It's not even close to over. What's been set in motion over these past few weeks is still moving, still building, and every new voice that gets added to this choir makes the orchestration more visible rather than less. The blueprint is out in the open now for anyone willing to look at it honestly, and Caitlin Clark, who has never needed anyone to fight her battles, who has never needed a manufactured narrative to justify her presence anywhere she's ever competed, is still right there in the middle of all of it, doing exactly what she's always done, leaving people with no choice but to pay attention.
The Indiana Fever, congratulations, you four. You guys have successfully broken Caitlin Clark. Great job. You guys have tried your damnedest to turn her into
Caitlin Clark is a once-in-a-generation player, not the kind of thing people say loosely, the kind of thing you can actually prove. The same way Magic Johnson made you rethink what a point guard could be, the same way Michael Jordan made scoring look like an art form, the same way LeBron James walked into a league and immediately made it his. Caitlin Clark carries that same energy, that same gravitational pull, except she's doing it in women's basketball right now, and somehow the people closest to her are the biggest obstacle standing between her and her full potential. She is not a typical player. She never has been. From 30, sometimes 35 feet out, she can make a defense completely unravel. That's not hype. That's physics. Defenders have to sprint out to her well beyond the arc, and the second they do, the entire floor opens up. Teammates who wouldn't normally see daylight are suddenly wide open. Lanes that were locked shut are suddenly there for the taking. She doesn't just make plays happen, she makes the court reshape itself around her presence. That is a gift that cannot be coached into someone. Either you're built like that, or you're not. Caitlin Clark is absolutely built like that. So why is Indiana Fever's coaching staff, Stephanie White, Kelly Krauskopf, Amber Cox, and even her own representation through Clutch Sports Group, running systems that barely use that? Post-entry sets, funneling everything into the paint while she's standing on the perimeter waiting. Caitlin Clark, someone who can crack a defense wide open without even touching the ball, being treated like a spot-up option. It's the kind of decision that makes you stop and stare. The talent is undeniable. The impact is right there. Someone just keeps choosing to look away from it.
get rid of those four and you get rid of your stooge of an agent, Aaron Kane, you'll be free. And I know we don't want her to go the LeBron route, but at this point, you need to get rid of Aaron Kane and you need to call Rich Paul immediately.
Take a look at who Indiana Fever is actually trying to build this post-heavy system around. Monique Billings is barely cracking 10 minutes a night. 10 minutes. That's a bench contributor, not a focal point. And Aaliyah Boston, a genuinely talented, real future ahead of her, is still working on finishing through contact at the rim with any kind of reliability. She's not there yet, but even setting that aside, centering your entire offensive identity through the post while Caitlin Clark is standing on the wing doesn't just waste her, it hands every opposing defense exactly what they're hoping for. A blueprint to eliminate her without ever having to guard her. That's not a game plan, that's a gift wrapped up in a clipboard, and the post sets are only the beginning, because the rotation decisions, that's where this whole thing starts to unravel completely. 6.5 minutes, that's how long Caitlin Clark gets before she's being waved to the bench in the first quarter. 6.5 minutes. She's barely settled in, barely started reading how the defense is playing her, barely started doing the things that make her impossible to stop. And she's already sitting down. The results spoke for themselves. Portland went on a 13-2 run the second she came off the floor. The game flipped on a single substitution, and Stephanie White's response to that wasn't urgency, wasn't any kind of honest reassessment. It was an explanation that didn't hold up under the slightest scrutiny. The reasoning offered was that Aaliyah Boston is working under a minutes restriction, which is fair, that's a real situation, but then that same restriction was used to justify pulling Caitlin Clark at the exact same time. Two completely different players, two completely different circumstances, packaged together like they're the same conversation. They are not even in the same category. Here's what people don't always think about when Caitlin Clark sits down. You're not just losing her points, you're losing the entire force field she creates. Defenses that were scrambling, doubling, rotating, overextending, they breathe, they set up, they get organized. The spacing that was pulling everything apart collapses the moment she's not out there. And when she checks back in, she's not stepping into a rhythm that was maintained in her absence. She's stepping into a defense that has had time to reset, anchor in, and is no longer stressed by the threat she carries. That's not development. That's not rotation management. That's putting your best weapon down at the worst possible time and calling it strategy. Then came the Golden State explanation, and this one really lays it bare. Stephanie White said the substitution in that road game came down to not wanting Raven Johnson on the floor in a hostile environment without another ball handler beside her. Read that slowly. Caitlin Clark's floor time in a nationally televised road game was cut because the coaching staff was worried about a role player's comfort level in a loud arena. That was the reasoning. That was what they offered. But the deeper problem isn't even the one bad decision. It's what that reasoning reveals about how this organization thinks. They are choosing protection over everything else, and protection is exactly the wrong instinct when you're trying to build something real around a player like Caitlin Clark. The greats were never handled with that kind of caution. Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, they got thrown directly into the fire. Hostile crowds, elite defenses, high stakes moments before they were ready. That pressure didn't break them, it built them. It sharpened them into exactly what they became. Keeping Caitlin Clark comfortable is not developing her, it's delaying her. It quietly signals that the organization doesn't fully believe she can handle what's coming. And what's coming? The playoff floors, the championship pressure, the arenas that will be louder and meaner than anything she's faced, will not slow down and wait for Indiana Fever to decide she's prepared. The game doesn't work like that. Now think about what all of this is doing to her mentally. Caitlin Clark is the most recognized player in this sport right now. She moved the needle on women's basketball in ways that hadn't happened before. She walked into her professional career carrying that weight, that expectation, that responsibility, and every single time she starts to find her groove, starts to feel the game open up the way it does when she's at her best, she gets pulled. Not for any reason that makes real sense. Not for anything documented, just because that's apparently how the staff wants to do it. That kind of unpredictability gets into a player's head. Elite athletes survive on instinct and freedom. The moment a player starts wondering whether she's about to get yanked, she stops reacting and starts hesitating. She starts thinking through every decision instead of just making it. And for Caitlin Clark specifically, whose entire game runs on split-second reads, on improvisation, on the kind of instinctive creativity you cannot manufacture, hesitation is devastating. And then the coaching staff started making comments publicly suggesting Indiana Fever moves better and faster when Caitlin Clark isn't the one running things. In a closed film session, that's a coaching note. Said in front of cameras and reporters, that's a public statement of no confidence. It tells her teammates how to see her. It tells the media how to frame her. It tells every opposing coaching staff exactly where the crack in the relationship is. That kind of messaging doesn't stay in a press conference. It spreads. There are also reports that the team's sports psychologist has been pulled into conversations around getting Caitlin Clark to embrace her current situation with less resistance. Sit with that for a moment. The psychological resources inside that building aren't being used to empower her, to fuel her competitive drive, to help her demand the right environment for her talent. They're apparently being used to smooth over her frustration with a diminished role. That's not development, that's management. And it is exactly the wrong approach for a player who needs her fire burning at full intensity. Every transformative athlete needs people around them who understand the assignment, not just coaches and trainers, advocates, people who know exactly how much power their client holds and aren't afraid to pull it out when the moment calls for it. People who know that when you represent someone like Caitlin Clark, silence is not neutral. Silence is always a loss. And right now, the silence coming from her representation under Erin Kane has been impossible to ignore. Hit pieces circulating through outlets like USA Today framing her situation as a player issue rather than a systemic coaching failure, and nothing from her camp to push back on that narrative. No coordinated response, no public repositioning, no behind-the-scenes pressure on the organization to rethink how they're handling the player responsible for most of their revenue and all of their visibility. Compare that to how an agency like Clutch Sports Group operates when Rich Paul has a client being publicly undermined. That response is already moving before the story even finishes spreading. Media relationships get activated, the counter narrative starts taking shape, and the organization gets reminded quietly but clearly exactly what they stand to lose if they keep going down a road that works against the person their entire business depends on. Here's the part that nobody wants to sit down and actually say out loud. Caitlin Clark is not just good for the Indiana Fever. She is not just good for women's basketball. She is genuinely, measurably, historically good for the entire sports landscape right now. And the WNBA as a business should be treating her accordingly. The ratings don't lie. The ticket numbers don't lie. The jersey sales don't lie. Arenas that were half empty 2 years ago are now selling out weeks in advance specifically because people want to see her play. Specifically her, not a team, not a concept, her. And that matters because the WNBA has been fighting for mainstream legitimacy for over 2 decades. They have been fighting for broadcast deals, for coverage, for the kind of cultural footprint that other leagues take for granted. And then Caitlin Clark walks through the door and hands them all of it almost overnight. NBC picked up games, CBS picked up games, USA Network expanded coverage. Viewership numbers that the league had never seen before suddenly became the baseline conversation. She didn't just grow the audience, she created a completely new one. People who had never watched a WNBA game in their life started tuning in because of her. That is not something you manufacture with a marketing campaign. That is something that happens once, maybe twice in the history of a league if they're lucky. So the question that keeps coming back around is why, with all of that on the table, the infrastructure around her seems so committed to making things harder than they need to be. Because the WNBA itself has a stake in this. This isn't just Indiana Fever's problem to figure out. When Caitlin Clark is being misused, underutilized, or publicly undermined, the ripple effect goes well beyond one franchise. It touches the entire league's momentum. It slows something down that took years of grinding just to get started. And Caitlin Clark herself, this is the thing that gets lost in all the noise around the politics and the rotations and the front office decisions. She has handled all of this with a level of composure that is genuinely remarkable. She shows up every single game, every single practice, every single media availability. She doesn't blow up press conferences. She doesn't throw teammates under the bus. She doesn't go on social media and air grievances publicly. She just keeps going, keeps shooting, keeps facilitating, keeps doing the work, even when the system she's operating inside of isn't doing the work for her. That kind of professionalism under that kind of pressure at this stage of her career says everything about the kind of competitor she actually is. But here is the reality. And this is the part that should make everyone paying attention genuinely uncomfortable. Composure has limits, patience has limits, and the window where a player is at her most hungry, most driven, most locked in and ready to take over is not infinite. These are the years that define careers. The early seasons are where habits get built, where identities get established, where a player figures out exactly what kind of force she's gonna be at the highest level. And right now, instead of those years being spent in a system that pushes her to her absolute ceiling, they are being spent navigating internal friction, unexplained substitution patterns, and an organizational philosophy that seems almost allergic to fully unleashing what it actually has. The WNBA cannot afford for that window to get wasted. Not now. Not when the momentum is this real and this rare. Because the truth is that stars like Caitlin Clark do not come around on a schedule. You do not get to place an order for the next one. She arrived at a specific moment in a specific cultural climate, carrying a specific kind of energy that connected with people in a way that goes beyond basketball. That combination is not repeatable on demand. And every game that goes by where she is not operating at full capacity, every rotation decision that chips away at her rhythm, every public comment that quietly works against her credibility, all of it is time that does not come back. What she is capable of when everything is actually working, when the offense is built around her range, when the system trusts her reads, when she's got real minutes and real freedom to operate, is something that this league has not seen before. Not at this scale, not with this kind of reach into the broader sports conversation and the people who understand what's actually at stake here, not just for Indiana, but for the entire league, need to be asking much louder questions about whether the current setup is built to let that happen, because right now it isn't. And the longer that stays true, the more of something genuinely historic gets left on the table.